What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel, and today we're actually going to be going through all 9 of the movies in the Skywalker Saga, and I'm going to be essentially speculating all of the main boss fights across all of those movies in LEGO Star Wars, and pretty much guessing which of the main boss fights are going to be in the game. Now, like I said, this is just speculation right now, there is no confirmation. To be honest, there are actually some of these that are confirmed, but for the majority of these movies, this is all just a bit of a guessing game. And one thing that I will say as well is that I'm not going to be going through every sort of big mission, it's mostly just going to be the actual like one-on-one boss fights, or in certain cases there's like 2v1s and 3v1s, for example, but these are mostly just talking about the main boss fights with actual villains rather than any of the big missions in the game. For example, stuff like the Petronarchy Arena or the Battle of Naboo. In a way, obviously those could be seen as boss missions since they are a really big mission, but yeah, like I said, this is just going to be focusing on essentially like the villain fights, if that makes sense. Before we get into it, if you guys are new to the channel, then definitely hit that subscribe button and turn on those notifications. There's going to be plenty more LEGO Star Wars content on the way, but with that being said, let's get stuck right into it. So I'm going to be going through the movies in chronological order, and obviously that starts us off with episode 1. Now, I think one of the ones that I did not expect to see is that escaping the Naboo core, as in the scene in the movie where they're in the little underwater shuttle and they're escaping the fish that keeps chasing them. That is actually considered to be a boss fight because the fish does have a really big health bar, so that is actually, I think, confirmed to be one of the boss fights. We've then also got Duel of the Fates, which is probably going to be one of my most anticipated sequences in the entire game. The whole fight with Obi-Wan, Qui-Gon and Darth Maul, that's going to be a lot of fun. And then lastly for episode 1, I think the Lucre Hulk at the end where Anakin blows that up, that is actually considered to be a boss fight as well. Now, like I said earlier, generally this type of stuff I'm not going to be really, guessing at throughout the video because, for example, Petronarchy Arena in Attack of the Clones, in a way that could be seen as a boss fight because you're going to have to fight those creatures, I assume, the creatures that Anakin, Padme and Obi-Wan have to fight. But to me personally, they don't really feel that, it's not quite a boss fight. It's not like you're fighting Darth Maul, Palpatine or someone like that. But in this case, because you are playing as Anakin and you're blowing up a single ship, I do consider that to be a boss fight, and it is confirmed. Like I said earlier, some of these are confirmed. So those are the 3 that I think will be happening for episode 1. Moving on to episode 2, which is Attack of the Clones, we obviously are going to have Obi-Wan versus Django on Kamino, and I do think that will be pretty much the first boss fight in that game. And then, like I said, Petronarchy Arena could be considered a boss fight, but for me personally, it isn't quite a boss fight. It's more of just a whole sequence. And so the only other boss fight that I think will take place in episode 2 is actually the Battle of the Jedi, which is Anakin, Obi-Wan and Yoda versus Count Dooku. That pretty much takes place right after that little battle sequence in the Petronarchy Arena on Geonosis. So I do think episode 2 will only have a couple, those being Obi-Wan and Django, and then Battle of the Jedi. But like I said, the Petronarchy Arena one could actually be considered a boss fight, so we will just have to wait and see. Now, moving on to episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. This is the one on my list here that actually has the most boss fights in it, and I've got 4 here that are all pretty much guaranteed to happen. I would be pretty shocked if any of these aren't in the game. So the first one, which is pretty obvious, is Obi-Wan and Anakin versus Dooku. Obviously that happens right at the start of the movie, so I'm going to assume this will be pretty much the first mission that takes place. We do see footage of this in, I can't remember which trailer, but there is a trailer where we see Obi-Wan throwing something at Dooku on the capital ship, so that one is essentially confirmed. We also then see footage of Obi-Wan versus Grievous, and so that one is obviously confirmed as well. We've then at some point seen footage of Yoda versus Palpatine in the Senate building, so that again is once again confirmed. And then lastly, one of the most iconic moments in all of Star Wars is Anakin versus Obi-Wan, and again we have seen footage of that. So these 4 are essentially confirmed. Whether they do all count as boss fights, I'm not 100% sure. Certain ones, like for example Yoda versus Palpatine, no one actually really dies there, so ones like that I'm not 100% sure if that will be a boss fight or if it's more of just like a quick little sequence, and obviously that could happen at the same time that Anakin's fighting Obi-Wan. So all of these are going to be in the game, but yeah, depending on how they wanted to do it, not all of these might be boss fights, but those are the 4 that I've picked for episode 3. Now moving on to episode 4, and the only ones that I've got here are actually Obi-Wan versus Vader, which again could be kind of similar to the Yoda versus Palpatine one, where Obi-Wan obviously is destined to die in that, and I don't assume we're going to be playing as Vader in that sequence. So any boss fight where the character you're playing as is, destined to die, that does feel kind of weird in a way, and so Obi-Wan versus Vader might not even be in there. I'm sure it will be in the game, but whether that's considered a boss fight, I'm not 100% sure. And then aside from that, the only one I could think of on top of that is the Battle of Yavin, which again isn't quite like a boss fight taking on a whole Death Star. Like, it's not really a 1v1 like I mentioned earlier, but kind of the same thing as the Lucre Hulk in episode 1. We're no doubt going to be playing as Luke, and we're going to have to blow up the Death Star, which in itself is technically a single enemy. It's a single thing that you have to blow up. So again, that is confirmed to be in the game, and I guess that will technically count as another boss fight. Moving on to episode 5, which is Empire Strikes Back, and the only one that I've got here, and correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like I'm actually missing something here. I've tried to, I've been thinking about this all morning, sort of laying out this video, and the only one that I can think of is Luke versus Vader on Bespin. Maybe I'm having a mental blank. It has been probably a year since I've watched Empire Strikes Back, but I feel like I've seen it enough to sort of know what happens in it, obviously, and unless I'm having a mental blank, I feel like that is really the only like boss encounter throughout that movie. There is the stuff on Bespin with like Vader and Han and those guys that I guess could be seen as a boss fight, but I'm not really sure if that would be a boss fight. So for me, the only one that definitely stands out as a boss fight is Luke versus Vader. I guess maybe the Hoth sequence at the start of the movie could be a boss fight, but taking on the AT-ATs, I don't really feel like that is necessarily a boss fight, simply because there's more than one and they're not really like a single character, if that makes sense. But the Hoth sequence could also be considered a boss fight, and I'm pretty certain it will be in the game. It's been seen in the trailers. Now moving on to episode 6, which is Return of the Jedi. The first one that stands out to me is the Rancor battle, with obviously Luke versus the Rancor at Jabba's palace. With how big the Rancor is, I'm going to assume that is a boss fight. We've seen that in the gameplay trailers as well, so I'm going to assume that's a boss fight, but I'm not 100% sure. And then once again, the only other real proper boss battle that I can think of is Luke versus sort of Vader and Palpatine at the end, and I guess almost Vader versus Palpatine as well in a way. That will obviously be in there, and I guess that will be considered a boss fight. And for me personally, those are the only two that really stood out. I guess there are certain other sequences that could have a boss fight element. For example, the sail barge sequence, that could be a boss fight to blow up the sail barge or something like that. Even possibly Leia versus Jabba the Hutt, to be honest, that could be a boss fight as well. And then even on Endor, for example, you could have Han and the Ewoks versus the AT-STs. Those could be considered boss fights as well. To me personally, they don't stand out as much as like Luke versus Vader, but again, they could be considered that, so I thought I'd throw them in there anyway. Now moving on to episode 7, The Force Awakens, and weirdly enough, the first one that I think of here is Finn versus Traitor, TR-8R, the stormtrooper that has that like electro baton thing that he fights Finn with the lightsaber. Obviously, this is a bit of a meme sort of situation within Star Wars, but I do think that will actually be considered a boss fight. It's the first time that we actually see the lightsaber ignite, I'm pretty sure, in the movie, at least in real time. Anyway, obviously, Rey picks it up before that, and we do see it ignited, but I'm fairly sure that's the first time we see Luke's lightsaber actually ignited, and so I do think that will be considered a boss fight. And in the Force Awakens game, that was actually a boss fight as well. So that's the first one that comes to mind, but then the one after that is Finn and Rey versus Kylo on Starkiller Base. That is obviously the final battle of the movie, and I think that will be the final boss fight for the movie in this game as well. Now moving on to episode 8, the first one that comes to mind is Poe versus the Dreadnought. I think that will technically be considered to be a boss fight as well, just the same as like the Death Star sequence and the Lucre Hulk in episode 1. And then the only one that I can guarantee will be a boss fight is the Throne Room sequence. We've seen plenty of gameplay of that, and I think that's kind of like the main sequence in the movie in terms of like a saber fight anyway. Now the crate sequence with Luke versus Kylo, that could be considered a boss fight, but again, it's a bit of a weird one because it's not really a fight. Like Luke doesn't actually really fight him, so I thought that was worth mentioning, but yeah, I don't really see that one being a boss fight, to be honest. Now last but definitely not least, we have episode 9, which is obviously The Rise of Skywalker, and the first one that comes to mind is Rey versus Kylo on Basana, the sequence where he chases her down with the TIE silencer. Now weirdly enough, they don't really fight there, so I'm not 100% sure if that will be a boss battle, but it's one of the like standout moments of the movie, I guess, so that's probably one that I think could be a boss fight. But in saying that, like I said, you don't really actually fight him, so it'll be interesting to see how that one goes. Now one fight between Rey and Kylo that definitely does happen though is the battle on Kijimi, and it's weirdly enough, it's kind of like a battle between that and on the Star Destroyer, because they're in that weird little realm of their own where they're sort of connecting in different places. I think that will definitely be a boss fight, and I think that could be really cool to see as well. The whole sequence where they like break down the stand with Vader's helmet, obviously that's going to be really cool to see that in the Lego bricks, so I'm definitely keen to play that section of the game. Now lastly for this movie, I think essentially the entire Exegol sequence is going to be a boss fight. Obviously Rey versus Palpatine will be the main boss fight of that section, but then Ben Solo versus the Knights of Ren, I'm sure that will be included as well. I think they will be the final boss fights in the entire game. So that is it for the list of what I think are going to be the boss fights in each of these movies throughout the game. Now I've done the planning for this at like 4 AM this morning, and there's a good chance that my brain is absolutely fried. Like I said, for episode 5 I could only think of one, and I feel like I'm missing some here, so if I have missed any, please do leave a comment down below and let us know which other boss fights you think there could be. I'm almost certain I've missed some, and to be honest, I'd probably have missed one for every single movie, so definitely leave a comment down below and let us know if I've missed any. If you enjoyed the video, then be sure to leave a like down below, and if you are new to the channel, then definitely hit that subscribe button and turn on those notifications so you don't miss out on any upcoming LEGO Star Wars The Skywalker Saga content. If you want to support the content that I make here on YouTube, then consider supporting the channel over on Patreon. The link to that is down in the description. But with that being said, thank you all very much for watching. You guys have a great day, and may the Force be with you always.